Don't forget to subscribe, click the bell to be notified.
Let me get started on sharing something when it comes to succession and engagement and involvement. Let me give you one quickie. The source of this came from a guy by the name of Digger McDougall. And Digger was he was chief psychologist of the Canadian military. And he sat on the society's leadership task force with me. And the acronym is Ask Art. Ask Art.
I know Digger personally.
You've experienced him. And it stands for this. If you know somebody's attitudes, skills, and knowledge, if you know somebody's attitudes, skills, and knowledge, you know what activities, roles, as in ROLES, and tasks that you can give them that they will succeed in. If you know somebody's attitudes, skills, and knowledge, you know what activities, roles, and tasks you can give them that they will succeed in. It's pretty simple and it's pretty straightforward, but the beauty of it is it can work. There's a couple of different things that I would ask you to think about. Some of this kind of might go a little bit beyond what we can talk about here in the next 45 minutes. But that said, I would ask you to think about, how do you have the jobs designed? One observation that I've made within my barbershop career is we have a tendency to package job descriptions that a mere mortal cannot effectively do that job and have a life that year. One of the things that I had learned in the JCs a gazillion years ago was they had a tendency to salami slice jobs so that they were only about this wide. And so that somebody could do that and say yes and still have a life. Now I realize that if you've got 6 people, that this is going to have, it's not going to be quite as valuable, than if you have 55. But to give you an example, when I first took over as music VP for Gotham back in 2011 or 2012 or something like that, we were a 25-person chapter. And when I was asked to come on as music VP, I said, I'll do it on one condition. I said, I'm not going to do it the way other music VPs have done the job. They said, what are you talking about? I said, I've watched too many people burn out because the job was too big. I said, I'm just not going to do it that way. And they said, okay, so go ahead and own the role, do whatever you want. Well, without exaggeration, within about 7 to 9 weeks, 17 of the 25 people in Gotham were on my music team, much to the dismay of the membership, VP, and everything else. I literally had somebody who was only in charge of written music, because in those days we would use sheet music for guests. I had somebody that was only in charge of maintaining electronic music. I had somebody whose no other job was to be able to know the pitch pipe or the pitches for every song and every spot. I had somebody whose only job was to teach tags every other week. I certainly had section leaders. I had somebody whose job it was to purely be in charge of organizational logistics. If we had to go anywhere, I had and I used, similar to the early history, I used all kinds of funny titles, you know. So I had a transportation czar, and I had a polecat czar, you know, and I had all kinds of things. But it did two things. It gave people a reason to show up because they had a job to do that evening, and it divided it up into something that somebody could succeed in and not have to give up the rest of their life. The other thing that does is Brown's rule is no single point of failure. And so I never want to be in a position where there's only one person that knows how to do something. And so I always want to make sure that I have a backup. And so my view of president is that you really become the backer upper in chief for all the rest of your officers. So that your job necessarily is not supposed to be the chief doer, but the chief backer upper of people that you. Now again, you by trying to implement what I talked about before, the ask art, and I would avoid a survey like the plague on this one. I am going to very much encourage you to go the old-fashioned route of picking up the phone and having a real live conversation with somebody on a non-chapter night. Because if I call Paula and I say, hey, Paula, this is Doug, can you and I have a phone call, you know, over the next couple of days? There's a much higher likelihood that Paula is going to take my request seriously if I'm doing it on a non-chapter night than if I try to squeeze it in 5 minutes before rehearsal. So set yourself up to, you know, set yourself up to win in terms of having this conversation. Some of the questions that I've asked people in the past is making sure that I really understand what they do personally and professionally and other experiences that they've had in their lifetime. Sometimes these little quirky things that you heard about somebody that said, oh yeah, you know, I used to run the transportation pool when I was in the military. Well, guess what? That just told me that this person is not allergic to logistics. If I get in trouble, I know who I can potentially, you know, call on to be able to use that resource. So I would ask you to really listen carefully when you're having those conversations, to really engage people. The other thing that I've asked people, and because it's a question that they don't get asked often, don't be surprised if you take them by surprise, is ask them what would constitute success for them this year as a barbershopper. And whatever they tell you, write it down, because they just told you what's important to them this year. And then use that as an opportunity to start asking some deeper questions, if you will, in terms of what help, if any, are they going to need from you to make that come true? What help, if any, are they going to need from any other resources that you have in your chapter? But quite candidly, as you can see around this Zoom call, as well as the resources through Rob and through Steve and so on, as well as your fellow members on this call, we've got access to a lot of resources. So let's make sure that we don't have tunnel vision when it comes to what resources that we're using. Let's make sure that, similar to that 9 dots exercise, that we're asking ourselves the question, where is it possible we could be handcuffing ourselves without even recognizing it? When it comes to the successor development piece, if you started to do the salami slicing of jobs, I think that's a first. I think that very much is a first step in terms of being able to build people into being able to succeed in that role. And I'm not using the word build lightly. One of the things that I saw the JCs do brilliantly is that when they got somebody to take on a new role, they literally surrounded that person with resources that almost made it impossible for that person to fail in that role. A lot of times in other organizations, they don't put that infrastructure in place. And so they'll get somebody to be a quote unquote volunteer, promise them all kinds of help, the person says yes, and then it all vanishes, and this person is left by themselves without a whole lot of knowledge or a whole lot of support system. And then when something doesn't go well, people go, oh yeah, well, look at the job that he or she's doing. And it's that we burn people out that way. So instead, when you're thinking about this, is what kind of resources can you put around this person to absolutely make sure what you're asking them to do, they can succeed at, because success leaves clues. And when people experience success, there's a natural tendency for them to want to take on more and more and more. We have to make it easy for them to succeed. When it comes to really truly being a servant leader, which is really turning the organizational chart, if you will, from a traditional pyramidal up on its end, the role of the true leader is to be able to help the people at the next level to be able to accomplish whatever they're trying to accomplish. So role of chapter president is help the vice presidents have a fantastic year. The role of the vice presidents is to be able to have the section leaders and all the administrative type of people have a fantastic year, until we get down to the role of a section leader is to make sure that the guys on the risers, and I'm using that from a generic phraseology, that the guys on the feet on the risers have a fantastic year. I mean, it's really that simple. But that's when we start to see the people that are on the risers as our customers, and not just the patrons who are buying tickets. That goes a long way to start to create a service culture, if you will. One of the other things that came up was, if you have a smaller group, what resources and I know Boyd volunteered to help on this, but when you have a smaller group, start to think in terms of what are small wins? What are some small victories that you can do, again, just to establish the momentum of making things happen? What kinds of things can you do? And particularly among small groups, one of the things that's been talked about for years and years and years is making sure, from a music perspective, that song selection is critical, and that you're not selecting songs that are over the head of the people that you actually have. Everybody may want to sing like Westminster or Hershey or the VM, but if that's not where your organization is, one message that sometimes we have to deliver to a music director is to make sure that we select the music that people can actually sing, and sing well, so that they really do have a chance to be able to get chords to ring.